Welcome to Designing Purpose, your guide to finding and pursuing the career you were meant for, with me, life and career coach Brooke Cretz. Want to know the scariest part about leaving your job? The unknowing of what's next. But what if it were possible to leave the job you hate and pursue something that feeds your soul while still meeting your financial goals? On Designing Purpose, I will guide you step by step to leave jobs that no longer serve you and connect to the career and life you were meant for. Join in for powerful stories, examples, and guidance to go from feeling stuck in the unknowing to confidently transitioning to your next career. The Designing Purpose show starts now. So, over the course of the last 3 episodes on Designing Purpose, we have explored the first part of the purpose journey called the Purpose Catalyst, that period of time when we might feel that tug of not being in the right place, and we need to decide if it's time to make a change. To make this decision easier, we have outlined how to understand when you are disconnected from your purpose based on how you feel, cope, and imagine. The reasons you might be avoiding leaving your jobs are actually lies, the fears they are rooted in, and why you don't have to listen to them. And when your job invokes unhealthy sides of ourselves, we called our should selves, that ultimately leave us dissatisfied and misaligned to our true calling. So now that we have all of this knowledge and understanding of why we might not be in the best place for us, we can just leave our jobs, right? We can walk in confidently on Monday and deliver a professional notice with tight boundaries around when we leave and what we will do until that point, and respectfully accept our boss's wishes for our continued success elsewhere. So if you're like most people in jobs not for you, this image probably fills you with equal amounts of excitement and longing to have this chapter clearly shut so you can move on to what's next. And also dread and terror at leaving what is safe, stable, and familiar to venture out to the great unknown. And that's just it. Even with the knowledge, the understanding, and the information of why we aren't in the best places for us, what it does to us physically, mentally, and emotionally, and how it can bring out sides of us that are actually harming us. We can make equal, if not greater, justifications of all the wonderful reasons to stay. The fact that you've been there for so long and know the systems inside and out. The amazing time off and benefits you've worked your way up to. Your supportive coworkers who can express things to you just by a look when your boss is talking all about synergy and how he invented it. Flexibility to work from home. The mentors you've had who have helped you grow. All of these pulled together can make even the strongest among us question whether we're making the right choice or simply being entitled by wanting something different. So instead of figuring it all out, let's combine 2 of humanity's favorite pastimes, games, and focusing on other people's problems to avoid acknowledging our own. By playing Is It Time to Go? All right, so first up, we have Sally Jenkins here. Sally is a tax attorney and has an amazing salary and benefits. She gets a lot of respect from her coworkers and enjoys working with her legal team. However, most of her job is not spent interacting with people, and she is predominantly writing, reading, and putting together different documents that have to be written in such a way that she feels she cannot get close to her clients or be as empathetic and forthcoming as she would like to be. Most nights she is working until 9 or 10 p.m. on various briefs and paperwork, which also prevents her from spending much quality time with her 2 daughters. But she feels it's justified because she is demonstrating what it means to be a strong, successful woman and will earn what they need to have any opportunity she could ever want. So, it is now time for us to decide, is it time to go? Yeah, That's a tricky one. Good coworkers, high salary, helps people, but kind of at a distance, actually. And it is a long hours job, too, with all the paperwork. Doesn't really get to see your daughters, but I mean, I'm sure they'll feel better once they have their college paid for and they'll understand. Oh, Okay, you know what? Let's come back to this one. I think we just need to get warmed up first. Okay, so next up we have Robert Collins. Robert is a pediatric nurse and has an incredible passion for kids and helping people. His favorite part of his job is when he can offer comfort to a sick or ailing kid and their parents, especially when he can distract them with a story, a song, or by making them laugh. His patients really appreciate this, but the doctors have started telling Robert that he's being unprofessional and shouldn't be taking away from answering parents' questions or giving them any false hope in case things might be serious. Every time Robert tries to be himself to comfort a patient, one of his doctors pulls him aside to explain how he should do things and not to go off the system of how things are run there. They also chastise him for taking too much time with some patients, thus delaying the doctors and others who are waiting. But he also has to only work 3 days a week, gets along with the other nurses, and the practice has promised to pay for him to go to medical school should he ever need it. So is it time to go? Okay, so I mean, it's not great that his doctors kind of micromanage him, and he's always walking on eggshells to try to keep them happy and keep moving through patients. But I mean, it seems like he gets along well with the other nurses and his patients who appreciate him. And I mean, that's so huge to have med school paid for if he wants. I mean, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars he would save, right? I feel like it's worth sticking it out at least for now. No, even if he does start to kind of hate the work because he can't really be himself. Yeah, this is also hard. Let's just come back to this one too. I feel like the stakes are too high. All right, so last but not least, we have Kelly Thurston. Kelly is a middle school social studies teacher who got into it because she loves history and has always had a knack for explaining things in fun and interesting ways that kids, especially middle schoolers who would usually rather be doing something else, can understand and relate to. But due to always changing state and national mandates about what she can and cannot teach in her class, Kelly has to scramble to rework how things are taught, in some cases even omitting parts of history. And even though this is hard for her to do, she uses it as a new creative exercise to explore how she can best represent history while focusing more on the things she can actually teach. She feels this is okay since she doesn't have to change that much, but she also feels guilty when students sense she isn't telling the full story and ask questions to fill in the blanks. Kelly, however, loves the flexibility of the teaching schedule so she can be home in the afternoons and summers with her twin toddlers. So, is it time to go? Okay, so this one is a little clearer. I mean, she does have to change things for her students, which they don't like, but she always gets to be a little creative. And I mean, she's probably only really softening a few things that happened, not like erasing whole wars and things. And it is good that she has more time with her young kids, especially in the summers. I mean, it seems like her students really need her too. I mean, it's so hard to find good teachers. Oh my gosh, this is too complicated. I give up. So these examples show us that it can be shockingly difficult to understand when it's time to make a change in our jobs, especially because although they exist, having a job that is awful across the board is rare, and it's easy to find reasons to stay and benefits that make the job seem more attractive. If we only examine the pros and cons each weighted the same, there will often be times when the pros are equal or even outweigh what is challenging or misaligned for us in the job. That's why the key to deciding when it's time to go is not to evaluate based on the pros and cons of the position alone. It's to examine the answer to one question that I want each of you to be able to answer by the end of this episode. Are the challenges I'm facing in my job systemic? meaning, are they unchangeable by you or others? Do they have a clear, feasible, and actionable course of solution supported by people with authority? Over the course of this episode, I will show you how you can answer this question by understanding, first, what is really bothering you about your job, and which of your values is that compromising? Next, what do these compromised values tell you about your true priorities at work? And finally, is what is bothering you fixable or part of a larger systemic issue when we take into account those values and priorities? If the answer to this final question is yes, then we will know once and for all that it is time to go. And to better illustrate how to determine if the challenges you face at work are systemic, we will move through two examples. The first is based on a loose example of a former client of mine we will call James, and the other from my own story when I finally decided to leave my last job. Let's start with James. James first came to me when he realized he had a tough decision to make. He loved the work he was doing, and especially his relationships with his coworkers, but he was having challenges gaining trust and respect from his boss. And this was resulting in micromanaging, office politicking, and generally cutting James out of decisions in his department. James was genuinely torn. He loved what he did and especially appreciated being a strong support person and advocate for other people in his organization. Although he was unhappy and frustrated, he still wasn't sure if leaving was the right decision. So we began to run through this exercise to determine what was really bothering him, what this said about his values and priorities, and whether what was hindering these was in fact systemic or could be addressed or fixed. As we dug into what was most upsetting James in his role, we discovered it came down to feeling constantly micromanaged and even denigrated by his boss, consistently being overlooked for supervisor opportunities despite communicating this desire to his boss, being cut out of team decisions or collaborative problem solving, and lastly, a culture of busyness that made communicating openly more challenging. When we understood what was at the root of his frustrations, we could begin to see which of his values they were compromising. Why did these things in particular seem to make the job feel challenging when so much else was going well? As we examined them, we realized that the micromanaging boss was compromising James' values of trust and respect. The being overlooked for supervisor opportunities, despite communicating them, compromised his value of growth. Being cut out of team decisions or problem solving compromised his values of collaboration and openness. And the culture of busyness that made communicating openly more challenging compromised his values of connection and supportiveness. All of these core values, trust, respect, desire for growth, collaboration, openness, connection, and supportiveness, were being compromised and repressed on a regular basis, even though there were only a few challenges within the job itself. And even if he was still finding some level of fulfillment and values alignment in other areas, we could now see why he continued to feel frustrated. James loved giving up himself and meeting people where they were. He was a huge support on his team. And yet he didn't feel it reciprocated by his closest supervisor. And even though this might seem like something we can just brush off and get on with the rest of our job, we see now how that's not so easy when his core values were not being honored consistently. Let's look at my own example of what frustrated me in my previous job. A culture of constant doing and never enoughness, perfectionism to a degree that fear dominated, unrealistic expectations of how quickly and high quality things could be done, and an unwillingness to create vulnerable space to discuss challenges and find solutions. And it took me a really long time to understand what values this was compromising and why this culture upset me so much, when otherwise I enjoyed the work greatly and got to use a large range of my skills. And what I realized was that was underneath all of this was making people feel unworthy, making people feel like they shouldn't actually be in their job, making people feel like what they have to offer isn't actually valued or valuable. And when all of my values, like honoring people for who they are, messiness, play, fun, curiosity, openness, were in direct opposition to this way of being, and when it became consistent and showed no signs of changing, that was when I began to question whether my values would ever truly be honored there, or if the issues impacting them were in fact systemic. And to get to that answer, now that we have our core values in hand and how our jobs are impacting them, we can better understand what our priorities are and if these are consistent with what we experience at work. So let's go back to James's story. He realized that his values at work were really a sense of trust, shared appreciation and support of one another, and feeling valued and respected to contribute. So as we dug into those values, we started to look at what would be needed to facilitate those. What were those few core elements that would make James feel like his values were honored and he could show up to work every day as his full self? As we talked, we realized it came down to 4 key priorities in this order. 1, a trusting management style. 2, opportunities for growth. 3, people management responsibilities. And 4, an open and supportive company culture. Without these priorities in this order, James would continue to have his values compromised and ultimately feel misaligned at work, even if other things were going well. That's because those values were at the core of who he was, his true nature. When those were not consistently honored, it didn't matter how many interesting projects he had, amazing benefits he racked up, colleagues he connected with. He would always feel like he couldn't be his full true self at work. Before moving on to see whether what repressed his values was systemic or could be fixed, let's quickly look at how my own priorities emerged when I identified which of my values were being compromised. Once I understood that at the core of what was frustrating me at work and how it was in direct opposition to my core values of honoring people for who they are, messiness, play, fun, curiosity, openness, it helped me get super clear about what I actually needed at work to feel at my most whole and best self. Not just the content of the work itself, but what elements needed to be prioritized first in order for me to do my best and most enjoyable work. And after many, many months, I realized that my top 4 priorities at work were relationships that needed to be prioritized over results, people to be invited to be their full, messy, silly selves, lots of fun and enjoyment in the process, not just constantly chasing outcomes. And time to just be, consider, explore, imagine, rest, not just constantly doing. Once I got really clear on what I needed to feel my best at work, not just what was helpful or enjoyable or nice to have, I was able to see if what was currently compromising them was something fixable and changeable with a clear recourse for change, or if it was part of a larger systemic issue that had no clear action or authority to facilitate it. So back to James. With his priorities in one hand and key frustrations in the other, he could finally begin to identify what was underneath them and if it was truly systemic. And with this in mind, he began to question if his boss is micromanaging him, is there any recourse to speak with the boss and set expectations for how they work together and when oversight is actually necessary? In his case, when this did not result in any meaningful changes, he then questioned if it was possible to speak with his boss's boss about what he was experiencing to see if recourse was possible at that level. When he did this, the senior leadership was empathetic, but in their minds, there was nothing they felt they could do without alienating his boss, especially because he was in such a small department and they needed as many staff members as possible. But in this case, is there any way he can change managers or rework his reporting chain of commands? And in that case, there was no one who he could report to or work with since he was in such a small department and therefore felt stuck working closely with his boss. Once we were able to reach the root of the issues he was experiencing and discover that there actually was not any meaningful opportunities or options for change with authority to guide that change, especially since his boss did not support guiding the ways they worked and senior leadership felt their hands were tied and they could not affect any sort of reporting relationship change, it became clear that James would never have what he needed for his core values and priorities at work to be honored. A key advocate who could foster an atmosphere of trust, respect, support, connection, and collaboration. Then we realized that no matter how much he did enjoy other aspects of his work and even other team members who he worked with, he would continue to feel worn down by this constant mismatch of values and never feel he could fully be himself and what he was doing. Once James came to this conclusion that all of his options for action, speaking with his boss, raising the issues to top leadership, making the case for how he could better contribute, and having it fall on deaf ears, he made the uncomfortable but necessary decision to leave his job, knowing that by staying, even with everything he enjoyed, it would never fully align with who he was or what he was meant to do. As you know from previous episodes, my story was similar, but with a slightly different root cause that made my reasons for leaving systemic. I realized after some time that while my boss would speak about creating a culture of support and collaboration on the team, there was never the time or resources to meaningfully make that happen. And this came down to their boss and upper leadership feeling increasing pressure to say yes, take on more, and solidify our reputation and foothold in the market where our office was located. In my case, having a boss that continued expecting more from us was not necessarily their choice, but it came from clients and also their boss who were also constantly putting pressure on them to perform. And part of that pressure came because there weren't enough staff and too much work to deliver. And they seemed to be taking on too much work because there was a risk of poor optics or reputation if they said no. So even if employees were facing challenges and requesting lighter workloads or longer deadlines, it ended up not actually being a possibility. Once I realized that it wasn't them, it was not my boss in and of themselves, and even if they quit or were fired and then were replaced with someone else, we'd still be facing the same issues, just with someone new to feel frustrated towards, because they were a victim of a system that was overworked and under-resourced with these sky-high expectations. Although it took me longer than I would have liked, I eventually realized that there were no meaningful options for change and authority of others to make those changes a reality. Nothing would ever be as I hoped it to be. And I realized how many times I had banged my head against the wall trying to change something that never would. And even with the many benefits and opportunities that job had provided me, I made the scary decision to leave and discover what I was better suited for, which could make my priorities non-negotiable. So now it's your turn. As you understand what is really bothering you at work, what values that is compromising, which priorities you need to have present at work to feel whole and align with what you're meant to do, and how much control you have over making those happen, it's time to answer the question: are the challenges I'm facing in my job systemic? Do I actually have the ability and the authority to facilitate change and make sure my values are honored? Or can I admit that, unfortunately, the issues go too deep and it's time to move on? Although this decision can be fraught and difficult and make you question yourself right up until hitting send on your resignation, like it was for me, I guarantee that the second you do let go, the second you release your tight grip on this job you felt like you needed to have, even if it was harming you in the process, and the second you once and for all make the decision to walk away, you will wonder why you held on for so long, because you will finally be free to walk towards all of the incredible opportunities that you have waiting for you. Now that we have concluded the purpose catalyst phase, the coming episodes will focus on how to connect back to your true purpose, including how we can actually connect with that purpose and understand what we are meant to do, how to break old ways of working, thinking, or being for ultimate fulfillment in our next career or venture, how to do things your way in service to a balanced and fulfilling life, and lastly, how to develop an experimentation plan to put it all together. As always, I am so excited to be with you on this journey. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. You have been listening to Designing Purpose, your guide to finding and pursuing the career you were meant for. If you are curious to navigate the unknowns keeping you stuck in your job and confidently discover and pursue the career you were meant for, tune in every second and fourth Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time on transformationtalkradio.com, where I give straightforward and practical guidance to facilitate your next career move. For more information, visit www.thepurposefulpractice.com.